Remember when dinner was simple, when mom could whip up a hearty meal without worrying about food safety regulations, endangered species lists, or warnings from the health department. Those were the days of avocado-colored stoves and bell-bottoms, a time when kitchens buzzed with experimentation and bold flavors. As we journey back to the 1970s, we find dishes that were once staples but are now frowned upon, or even banned. Take, for example, blackened redfish. In the 1970s, Louisiana chef Paul Prudhomme introduced his now legendary blackened redfish recipe, a spicy, smoky dish that quickly became a national craze. Restaurants scrambled to add it to their menus, and home cooks rushed to replicate the fiery flavor. But its popularity came at a steep cost. Overfishing led to a dramatic decline in red drum populations in the Gulf of Mexico. By 1987, commercial harvesting of redfish was banned in federal waters, with many states following suit with their own regulations. Today, while limited recreational fishing is still allowed, the commercial sale of wild-caught Gulf redfish remains largely prohibited. That once celebrated dinner party centerpiece could now bring hefty fines if sold illegally. And then there was tiger meat sandwiches, not made from actual tigers, but still just as controversial by today's standards. This Midwestern delicacy. In the 1970s, a popular party dish known as tiger meat consisted of raw ground beef mixed with onions, salt, pepper, and sometimes raw eggs. This mixture was typically served on rye bread or crackers at family gatherings and social events. However, by today's standards, serving raw ground beef is a serious health violation. The USDA and FDA now strongly warn against consuming raw meat due to the high risk of contamination from E. coli, salmonella, and other harmful pathogens. Any restaurant offering such a dish today would be swiftly shut down by health authorities, and individuals serving it at public events could face legal consequences. What was once a beloved appetizer has become a textbook example of unsafe food handling. As for passenger pigeon pie, that one's just a joke. By the 1970s, passenger pigeons had already been extinct for decades, the last of their kind dying in 1914 due to relentless overhunting. Still, this extinction serves as a powerful reminder of how drastically our relationship with food and wildlife has evolved. In the 19th century, passenger pigeons were a cheap, common food source, often baked into pies. Their disappearance sparked early conservation efforts that would later help protect other species from the same fate. Today, hunting migratory birds without the appropriate permits is a violation of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, carrying fines and even imprisonment. What was once normal, casually hunting wild birds for food, is now regulated to ensure sustainability and ecological balance. In the 1970s, history was on the verge of transformation as laws around the exploitation of marine life were still in their infancy. At that time, sea turtle soup remained a luxurious delicacy, frequently served in upscale restaurants and coastal specialty markets, particularly in regions with deep maritime traditions. Often prepared using green sea turtle meat, the dish had been a symbol of prestige for centuries. However, even after the Endangered Species Act was passed in 1973, it took years for enforcement to gain traction. During that period, sea turtle populations continued to plummet. Today, all sea turtle species are protected under both U.S. law and international agreements. The hunting, harming, or consumption of sea turtles or their eggs is now strictly illegal, with violations carrying severe penalties, including substantial fines and imprisonment. What was once a mark of culinary sophistication is now firmly categorized as a wildlife crime. Similarly, whale meat, though never mainstream in most American households, was still legally available in select markets during the early 1970s. It was especially found in areas with whaling traditions or among immigrant communities from whaling nations. The meat, which resembled red beef, was often served as steaks or roasts. This practice saw a dramatic shift with the passage of the Marine Mammal Protection Act in 1972, which banned the hunting, killing, capturing, or harassment of marine mammals in U.S. waters. This was later reinforced by a global moratorium on commercial whaling, marking a significant turning point in the protection of marine wildlife. In 1986, the International Whaling Commission effectively banned commercial whaling, and today, possessing or consuming whale meat in the United States is illegal, with the exception of limited subsistence hunting by Alaskan natives. What was once considered an exotic and legal delicacy has now become a serious wildlife offense, subject to harsh penalties. Similarly, the idea of something like eagle eggs Benedict is largely hypothetical today, as bald eagle eggs were already protected by the 1970s. However, the passage of the Endangered Species Act in 1973 dramatically strengthened protections not only for eagles but for numerous other threatened species. In earlier times, there were instances of eagle eggs being collected and eaten, including within certain Native American traditions. Today, disturbing eagle nests or possessing any eagle parts, including eggs, is a serious federal crime unless one holds special permits, which are typically reserved for members of federally recognized tribes using them for religious purposes. These activities are strictly prohibited under both the Endangered Species Act and the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act, and violations can result in prison time and hefty fines, highlighting just how much more robust and strictly enforced wildlife protection laws have become since the 1970s. In rural parts of America during that same era, hunting season was a time to stock the freezer with home-butchered venison. Families often relied on deer meat to supplement their diets, and regulations around hunting, processing, and sharing game meat were far more lenient than they are today. Hunters typically processed their own deer at home and shared the meat with neighbors and relatives, a common and accepted practice in rural communities. In the 1970s, it was common for rural communities to share the bounty of a successful hunt with neighbors and extended family, often with little to no paperwork or oversight. Hunting was a widespread tradition, and the casual processing and distribution of venison within neighborhoods was a normal part of life. However, in today's world, such practices are heavily regulated. Most states now require hunters to obtain specific permits not only for hunting but also for processing wild game. There are strict rules about how venison can be distributed, with many states prohibiting the sharing of wild game meat beyond the hunter's immediate family unless proper documentation is provided. Additionally, the commercial sale of wild harvested venison is illegal across the United States. Activities that were once routine in the 1970s could now result in violations of various wildlife and food safety laws. Similarly, the consumption of unpasteurized dairy products has undergone significant legal changes. Back then, many rural families regularly consumed raw milk, cheese, and other dairy items, either from their own livestock or from trusted local farmers. This was particularly common outside of urban centers, where raw milk was readily available and considered normal. Today, however, the sale of unpasteurized milk for human consumption is prohibited in many states, and interstate sales are banned by federal law. The FDA warns that raw milk can carry harmful bacteria such as Listeria, Salmonella, and E. coli. Although a few states allow limited sales under strict regulations, violations can lead to serious penalties. What was once an everyday part of rural life in the 1970s would now be subject to strict oversight and potential legal consequences. In the 1970s, home canning experienced a revival during the Back to the Land movement. However, safety protocols at the time were far less developed than today. Many households relied on outdated, generational techniques rather than scientifically tested methods. One such method, open kettle canning, where hot food was poured into jars without further processing, was commonly used despite its risks. In the present day, selling home-canned goods without adhering to USDA-approved guidelines, proper licensing, inspections, and testing is a violation of food safety laws in most regions. The commercial sale of low-acid canned foods like vegetables, meats, and soups is especially restricted due to the potential danger of botulism. What was once a widespread household practice in the 1970s would now breach several health regulations if those items were sold to the public. During the same era, horse meat was still legally sold in some parts of the United States. Although it was never as popular as beef, it was viewed as an acceptable, if unconventional, meat option. Some specialty butchers offered it, and it held cultural significance among certain immigrant communities with traditions of consuming horse meat. This changed in 2007 when Congress effectively prohibited horse slaughter for human consumption by cutting off federal funding for the inspection of horse slaughter facilities, making its sale and distribution nearly impossible in the U.S. today. Although the ban on horse meat has been lifted and reinstated several times, a combination of social stigma and strict state regulations has effectively kept it off American dinner tables. Today, there are no operational horse slaughter facilities in the U.S., and selling horse meat for human consumption is illegal in many states. What was once considered an alternative red meat option in the 1970s is now nearly impossible to buy or sell legally. Similarly, homemade moonshine had its moment in the 1970s, especially in rural communities where distilling spirits at home was a long-standing tradition. Though illegal, it was still commonly made and consumed, with law enforcement often turning a blind eye to small-scale operations. However, the legal landscape has since changed dramatically. Today, producing spirits without proper licensing and paying federal taxes is a serious crime that can result in felony charges, fines, and prison sentences of up to 5 years. While home brewing of beer and wine has become more permissible, the ban on home distilling remains firmly in place. What was once a simple mason jar of Grandpa's homemade whiskey could now land someone in serious legal trouble. As for absinthe, The drink remained officially banned in the United States throughout the 1970s, as it had been since 1912. Nonetheless, imported bottles still circulated quietly, often finding their way into the hands of artists and members of the counterculture who were drawn to its mystique and association with European bohemia. The mystique surrounding absinthe, an anise-flavored spirit once rumored to cause hallucinations, made it feel like a forbidden fruit. Ironically, what was once outlawed is now legal again in the United States, as of 2007, provided it adheres to FDA regulations regarding thujone content. This shift highlights how regulations can evolve to become more precise and rational, targeting harmful elements rather than banning entire products. Back in the 1970s, some homemade absinthe preparations contained dangerously high levels of toxic compounds, and such unsafe formulations would still be prohibited today under modern food safety laws. Similarly, traditional Scottish haggis, a savoury pudding made with sheep's heart, liver, and lungs, mixed with onion, oatmeal, suet, and spices, and encased in the animal's stomach, was once legally imported into the US. During the 1970s, Scottish-American families could still enjoy authentic haggis for Burns Night and other cultural celebrations. However, in 1971, the USDA banned the use of animal lungs in food products, and by 1989, imported haggis containing sheep lungs was officially prohibited due to concerns over scrapie, a neurological disease in sheep. Today, while American-made versions of haggis exist, omitting the lungs, purists argue that they simply don't compare to the authentic version once proudly served at Scottish-American gatherings. In the 1970s, American consumers had access to a wide range of cheeses that would now be prohibited under today's food safety regulations. Cheeses made from unpasteurized milk and aged for less than 60 days, both imported and domestic, were commonly found on grocery shelves. These raw milk cheeses, known for their bold and distinctive flavors, were not subject to the strict oversight we see today. However, current FDA regulations ban the sale of raw milk cheeses aged under 60 days, effectively removing many traditional European soft cheeses from the market in their authentic form. To comply with US standards, such cheeses must either be made with pasteurized milk or aged longer than originally intended, which significantly alters their texture and taste. The rich, creamy bries once savored in the 1970s would now be deemed a food safety violation if sold in their original state. Similarly, the era also saw the occasional use of homemade cough syrups containing codeine, especially in rural communities or among families with strong European roots. Despite existing prescription requirements, enforcement was comparatively lax, and traditional remedies with small amounts of controlled substances were sometimes prepared and passed down through generations. Today, the production of any medication containing codeine or similar controlled substances without appropriate pharmaceutical licensing is strictly illegal, carrying heavy federal and state penalties enforced by agencies like the DEA. In the 1970s, certain home remedies and food practices that were once common in rural and traditional American households are now heavily regulated or outright banned by the FDA. For instance, even small amounts of codeine and similar substances are strictly controlled today. Homemade medicinal concoctions, like those once stirred up by grandmothers, could now potentially lead to charges related to illegal drug manufacturing. One such example is sassafras root tea, a once popular folk remedy and aromatic beverage especially in the South and Appalachian regions. Despite its cultural significance, the FDA banned the use of sassafras root in food products in 1976 after studies showed that safrole, a primary compound in sassafras oil, caused cancer in laboratory animals. Modern sassafras flavorings used in commercial products have this compound removed, making the traditional preparation of natural sassafras root tea effectively prohibited for sale. Another notable practice from that era was the consumption of roadkill stew. In economically strained rural areas, families often salvaged meat from animals killed on roadways, such as deer or rabbits, as a practical, resourceful means of nourishment. While this waste not, want not mindset helped many during tough times, today's laws have placed strict limitations on such practices. Although some states allow roadkill salvage under specific regulated conditions, the casual collection and use of roadkill meat that was once common is now largely restricted by modern health and safety standards. In the 1970s, practices like collecting roadkill or foraging wild mushrooms were often done informally, especially in rural areas. Many families harvested animals found on roadsides for food without permits or reporting, a practice that would now be illegal in several states without proper authorization. Today, most states strictly regulate such activities, and taking roadkill without explicit permission may violate wildlife protection laws. Similarly, during the foraging boom of the 1970s, amateur mushroom hunters gathered wild fungi to include in family meals, share at local gatherings, or even sell informally to neighborhood restaurants. At the time, regulations around wild mushroom sales were minimal. However, today, the commercial sale of wild foraged mushrooms is tightly controlled. Certified experts must verify the mushrooms, and health departments enforce strict safety standards for any fungi served in restaurants. While individuals can still forage mushrooms for personal use, doing so without proper knowledge remains risky. The kind of casual selling or public sharing of wild mushrooms common in the 1970s would now breach food safety laws in many jurisdictions. Raw oyster consumption has also changed significantly. In the 1970s, oyster lovers often enjoyed them year-round, largely ignoring the traditional guideline to eat oysters only in months containing the letter R, September through April. Back then, people placed more trust in modern refrigeration to mitigate the risks. Today, stricter food safety standards and seasonal harvesting rules have been established to prevent illness, reflecting a broader shift toward more regulated and cautious food practices. In the past, transportation improvements made it easier to distribute fresh foods, but today, strict regulations govern the sale of raw oysters, especially those harvested from Gulf Coast waters during the warmer months, typically from May through October. This is due to the heightened risk of Vibrio vulnificus, a potentially deadly bacteria that flourishes in warm marine environments. Many states now ban the sale of raw Gulf oysters during this period unless the oysters have undergone special post-harvest processing to eliminate harmful bacteria. The casual oyster bars of the 1970s, which freely served untreated raw oysters in summer, would now face significant regulatory challenges and potential legal repercussions for non-compliance. Similarly, selling homemade beef jerky was once a common and accepted practice. In the 1970s, it was found at local markets, roadside stands, and even neighborhood grocery stores. Families often used cherished recipes passed down through generations, not just to preserve meat but also to supplement household income. However, under today's food safety laws, selling homemade jerky without proper licensing, facility inspections, and compliance with health codes is prohibited in most areas. Due to the particular risk of foodborne illness from meat products, commercial jerky production now requires HACCP, hazard analysis critical control point, plans, regular microbial testing, and certified processing facilities. What once was a simple family enterprise would now demand significant investment and adherence to stringent regulatory frameworks. Traditional foods like chitlins, chitterlings, which are cleaned and cooked pig intestines, also face modern scrutiny. Historically prepared in home kitchens without government oversight, chitlins have long held cultural and culinary significance in many communities. Today, however, preparing and selling them without health department supervision can violate public health codes, as proper cleaning and cooking methods are critical to prevent contamination and disease. In Southern and African American cuisine, chitlins, or chitterlings, have long been a traditional dish. During the 1970s, chitlin suppers were common community gatherings, often hosted in home kitchens or local community centers, typically without formal oversight from health departments. However, today the commercial preparation of chitlins is tightly regulated due to the risk of bacterial contamination, particularly from pathogens like Yersinia enterocolitica. Restaurants and food service establishments must adhere to strict protocols for cleaning, preparing, and cooking chitlins. While individuals can still legally prepare chitlins at home for personal or family use, the large-scale community suppers of the past would now require proper food service permits, inspected facilities, and compliance with specific food safety regulations in most jurisdictions. Similarly, the 1970s saw the rise of Caribbean food traditions in the U.S. due to increased immigration from the region. One such tradition involved the use of ackee, a fruit native to West Africa and a staple in Jamaican cuisine. At that time, knowledge of the fruit's potential toxicity was limited among American food regulators. Today, however, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, strictly controls the import and sale of ackee due to its content of hyperglycin, a toxin that can cause Jamaican vomiting sickness, a potentially fatal condition if the fruit is unripe or improperly prepared. As a result, the importation of fresh ackee is heavily restricted, and only processed versions from approved facilities are legally allowed in the United States. In the 1970s, as natural foods and international cuisines gained popularity, health-conscious individuals often turned to home remedies and do-it-yourself alternatives. Among these were homebrewed kombucha and homemade infant formulas, practices that, while common then, would now violate strict FDA regulations. Kombucha, for instance, was brewed at home without modern testing tools, often resulting in a beverage with unexpectedly high alcohol content due to extended fermentation. Today, any kombucha containing more than 0.5% alcohol by volume is classified as an alcoholic beverage, subject to licensing, taxation, and age restrictions. Commercial producers must either maintain alcohol levels below this threshold or adhere to alcoholic beverage laws. The strong, home-fermented kombucha shared among health enthusiasts in the 1970s would now be considered illegal to sell or distribute without proper licensing. Similarly, some mothers in the 1970s still relied on homemade infant formulas, using a mix of evaporated milk, corn syrup, and vitamins, recipes either passed down through generations or recommended by pediatricians. Although commercial baby formulas were available, they were sometimes avoided due to cost or personal beliefs. Today, however, both the production and sale of homemade infant formula are strictly prohibited under FDA regulations, and even sharing such recipes publicly could be considered a violation. Medical authorities strongly discourage the use of homemade infant formula due to serious concerns regarding nutrition and safety. Unlike commercial infant formulas, which are required to meet strict regulatory standards to ensure they provide the essential nutrients babies need, homemade versions often fall short and may pose health risks. While such formulas may have been used in the 1970s, today they would be considered potentially dangerous and would not be legally permitted for commercial sale.